Today's episode is sponsored by Datadog, a modern full-stack monitoring platform for cloud infrastructure, applications, and logs metrics, all in one place. From their recent report on serverless adoption and trends, Datadog found half their customer base using EC2s have now adopted AWS Lambda. They've examined real-world serverless usage by thousands of companies running on millions of distinct serverless functions, and they found that half of the Lambda invocations run for less than 800 milliseconds. You can easily monitor all your serverless functions in one place and generate serverless metrics straight from Datadog. Check it out yourself by signing up for a free 14-day trial and get a free t-shirt. Visit datadog.com/HanselMinutesShow to get started. That's datadog.com/HanselMinutesShow to get started. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Dr. Jennifer Akullian from the Growth Coaching Institute. She's an industrial organizational psychologist, and she helps individuals and organizations in the tech community. Hi, how are you?
Good. Thanks so much for having me today, Scott.
I am glad to be chatting with you. I have been looking all over this website called OSMI Help, OSMI Help, Open Sourcing Mental Illness Help.org. And your name has come up and this website has come up as I've been trying to explore how people talk about mental health in the tech community.
That's a good place to start. There's it's a new area that's gaining a lot of attention, and open sourcing mental illness has sort of paved the way for research around this area and supports for professionals in the tech industry. So I'm not surprised you found your way to that website.
It feels like, as I'm pretty active on social media, that I hear a lot of discussion around particularly anxiety, but also bipolar disorder. I hear about depression. I'm wondering, is it simply confirmation bias that I'm hearing about this more because there's Facebook and there's Twitter, or is there something about software and tech and open source that brings a certain kind of mind to this place, and then the tech exacerbates an already underlying situation?
Yeah, it's a really good question that comes up a lot, and it's hard to give a definitive answer, but you're thinking along the right lines. The awareness around mental health issues in the tech industry is gaining a lot of attention, so you are starting to see more people speak out about their own experiences, which is why, it looks like it's kind of more prevalent or gaining more sort of traction in the industry. But the question of why are people that are working in tech struggling with different mental health issues, is it because certain minds are attracted to that field, or is it the field is, working in that field is resulting in some mental health challenges? Again, it's a hard question to answer. I can give you as a professional my personal opinion. I don't think that working in tech leads to mental health problems that directly. I do think that the field attracts a certain kind of brain that is a very, high expectations, really successful, really motivated, highly intelligent, really good problem solvers, people who go into coding and computer science. And it seems to me, from looking at the research and from working with so many professionals in tech, that might be a tendency, that population tends to be more prone to some mental health challenges. And when I say prone, I mean more predisposed, or maybe has a genetic underlying factor to it that is consistent with some other areas that land people in sort of this field that they're in right now.
Interesting. So if I may paraphrase, the things that make us good at our jobs may also make some aspects of the job and our personalities somewhat challenging.
Absolutely. It's kind of, if you want to compare it to in the developer community, it tends to be very an introverted community. The minds that are attracted to the computer science work, the developer work, tend to be more on the introverted side. So it's not that working in tech is creating people who are introverted, although there are some, challenges of isolation and working siloed or remotely that can play into that. But I think it's more sort of the way that that brain is developed. Those tendencies tend to be consistent across the population, at least to a degree where, it stands out as a common theme.
Okay. And then might it be also our attempts to be more welcoming and more open and conscious and kind online that also allow people to express what might have been hidden before? So then we get a little bit of confirmation bias as it feels like everyone's anxious and everyone's uptight and everyone's stressed out as we kind of vent online. It seems like 20 years ago, I didn't even think about this, but now everyone is thinking about this.
Right. And not only do people have the platform to discuss this and vent or seek support, but the issue around stigma is much different today than it was 20 years ago. So people were much more reluctant to speak out and say, I have depressive symptoms or I'm feeling anxious because of the social stigma around it. And as that has been improving, you're seeing people, reaching out more and talking more candidly about it, which is really great because that's how people seek support and reach out when otherwise a stigma might hinder them from doing so.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything bad or is there anything negative about people, for lack of a better word, self-diagnosing? I've heard people say, I have an anxiety disorder and I was diagnosed by a licensed therapist or a clinical psychologist, and then other people just self-diagnose. Is there danger in self-diagnosis in this context?
I think there can always be danger in self-diagnosis because, of course, the error is higher when you don't have a professional diagnosing someone, and of course, you have your own bias when you're trying to diagnose yourself. I do think that if someone recognizes that they struggle with anxiety and they identify with having an anxiety disorder or anxiety challenges, that's okay. Whatever gets them to the point of reaching out and trying to get help and validation for that is beneficial. But of course, like I said, there's that concern of misdiagnosis where it really is helpful to have a professional make sure you're on the right track to getting supports and treatment for the correct condition or challenges that are taking place.
Mm-hmm. Now, since the only person whose head I'm inside is my own, I can only use my own experiences as my bit of context. I can see how other people behave and how other people say that they feel, but I can only tell how I feel. So I'll ask a couple of questions, and if you'll indulge me and forgive my ignorance if I get something wrong. What does anxiety feel like that is unhealthy anxiety versus healthy anxiety?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I can answer this sort of across the spectrum of different emotional challenges, not just anxiety. So, the big difference between struggling with anxiety and having a diagnosis, a clinical diagnosis of an anxiety disorder, is not just that you have the symptoms. You must meet criteria, specific symptoms for that diagnosis. But the second piece that people tend to forget is that symptomatology has to negatively impact your ability to function. So you might feel anxious, it might not feel good, you might have some social anxiety, it might impact your work or your relationships. A lot of people have that. That is a pretty common experience as a human, especially these days, and especially working in tech. But it's not really considered a diagnosis or a condition necessarily that requires treatment unless it is having a negative impact on your ability to function. So, you can't get through the workday, you're not able to collaborate with other people, whatever that looks like. So that's the really crucial second piece of a diagnosis, and the difference between feeling anxious and having an anxiety disorder, or feeling depressed or having, clinical depression, which might warrant more treatment than, say, the average person who experiences anxiety in their lives.
So I went and this is probably dumb, so again, forgive me, but I went and did a quiz online, and it asked me questions about anxiety in the context of, do you get hot flashes? Do you get heart palpitations? Do you feel unable to move? Kind of emotional paralysis. Is that what anxiety feels like?
That's a really, really tricky question you're throwing out there. Anxiety is actually a spectrum of disorders. So there are a number of different types of anxiety disorders, like social anxiety disorder or panic disorder or post traumatic stress disorder. And
Hmm.
these do look different. So it's hard to answer, this is what quote unquote anxiety looks like.
Hmm.
However, people do tend to describe it as having a physiological impact. So that sounds like some of the things that you were asked about is what is the experience in your body, physiological. And then, of course, the cognitive piece of it too, which people describe as sort of a racing mind, inability to sleep because you're constantly, going mentally. Some anxiety disorders have other behavioral implications too. So it does vary a lot. I think a lot of people can relate to struggling with anxiety, again, because of the society, culture, industry that we work in. And a more mild level of anxiety is like I said, something a lot of people can connect to. And I wonder if the that you took was looking more at this sort of traditional idea of do you feel anxious, or if it was trying to get to the root of a true diagnosable anxiety disorder.
Hmm. And it sounds like from what you said before, the essence of these things is whether or not it changes how you can function. Like if you find that something that used to work no longer works, or that you're unable to get out of bed or go to work and not feel, like we all feel uncomfortable or awkward or anxious, but where is that threshold, that moment where it's like, this is a bigger deal than I thought it was, and I need to go and like, how do we tell when it's time to seek help? I guess is what I'm trying to say. Everyone gets the blues,
Right.
but not everyone gets depressed. Everyone gets butterflies when they give a talk or any kind of public speaking, but not everyone has paralyzable or paralysis based anxiety and is unable to actually give the talk.
Sure. So you kind of hit it on the nose. If something has changed, all of a sudden it becomes more difficult to be productive at work or to maintain your relationships, especially if there's not something very obviously explaining that change, then that can be an indication that it's having an impact to a degree where it's detrimental and probably needs some attention. But the other thing to consider where I see people coming to the realization that it is maybe a bigger thing that needs more intensive treatment or approaches is if you can't access the supports you need. So if you're feeling depressed, whether it's just a change in seasons or, there was a breakup or you lost your job, if you're feeling depressed and you reach out for support, so, you try to increase your social supports or take care of yourself, exercise, diet, or even maybe reach out to a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
If you do those things, you tend to see an improvement. I mean, these are the areas that we've shown through research can improve in areas such as depression or anxiety. But if you can't access those supports, if you can't get yourself to a therapist or you can't get yourself to work out, then that's another indication that you probably need a higher level of support. You probably need to involve someone else. I get asked
Mm-hmm.
this a lot around medication and taking drugs for mental health challenges, which as a psychologist, I do not push the drugs at all. I actually start with all of the other ways of supporting people before going to psychiatric care. But
Mm-hmm.
if you can't access those other supports, like getting to a therapist or working on these other areas, then that's a time where it might be beneficial to speak to a doctor about maybe even short-term supports to be able to access the sort of treatment that you need to work through what you're dealing with.
Mm-hmm. I see a lot, and I've talked about this a little bit myself, about feeling like a phony or feeling like I've a bit of an imposter. And some days I feel like, oh my goodness, I've been in this business for 30 years and I'm surprised I'm still here and that people will talk to me. And then other days I feel like, well, I do okay. Like I'll do a thing and I'll be like, hey, look, I did that thing. I'm over here at the osmihelp.org forums, and I see a very common thread here. There's a particular thread that says, I'm a senior software engineer, but I don't feel like it. why is it that we find ourselves in tech, like that? We feel this sense of in over our heads. I mean, my brother's a firefighter and he doesn't feel in over his heads. And I've never heard a firefighter feeling like they can't do that. But I consistently feel in technical environments that people feel like, wow, I have this title and I don't feel like I'm the same as my title.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of ways to speak to this, I think. One is we have senior engineers who are 24 years old. So part of it is this disconnect
Yeah, that's a new
between,
thing.
coming right out of college, working for 2 years, all of a sudden being considered a senior because of your
Yeah.
technical skills, but still lacking some other skills that allow you to feel confident in that area. We also work in an industry that highlights sort of the 10x engineer and the unicorns and the founders that are super successful and the professionals who move up the ranks. And we don't tend to hear from most of the community, which are the people sitting in the back doing great work. And so everyone's sort of comparing themselves to this idea of success that they've either grown up with, which is, very high expectations of themselves, and the industry allows for as well, where we just really, really push people to excel and be their best and be the most innovative and productive and successful, which are all great things and really does push people to excel in a lot of ways. Unfortunately, it leads to some of the problems that we're here talking about today too, because that's a lot of pressure that people are not prepared for and not sure what to do once all of a sudden they're a senior engineer at a company and they don't feel like they can ask for help because they're supposed to be the expert, or they feel, like they're lacking in some area, but they can't really show that to someone, or the company or their colleagues will realize that they're a fraud and that they're not supposed to be in that, position. So it's this kind of constant battle of these very high expectations, and even when you're meeting them, being pushed even further, it's sort of an impossible reach, I think. What we ask of professionals in tech, and part of the reason tech is innovative and moves so quickly forward, but sort of at the expense of constantly being disappointed in yourself or your work or your failures, which I believe is a coach in the industry is part of the process. It's part of the innovative process to be failing constantly.
Yeah, if being able to fail, but also feel like one can fail safely. Like I always say, fail fast, fail often, but being allowed to fail has a component of privilege to it, and the ability to do that without someone flipping the bozo bit on you and saying, "Oh, look at Jennifer failed. She doesn't know what she's doing, and you only get to fail once, and maybe I get to fail 3 times before they flip the bit on me." That paranoia that I have to be perfect, otherwise they'll find out that I really am not supposed to be here, is a big challenge.
Yeah, that kind of speaks to your question earlier. I think that the genetic makeup, however you want to describe sort of the brains that are attracted to this kind of work, they, for example, they might tend to be a little more on the paranoid side, but then they work in an industry where it just plays into that and sort of, really it just pushes that forward even more. So, being born with having kind of a high expectations of yourself, how you're raised, maybe leading to high expectations, and then you get into a career where you have extremely high expectations, sometimes so high that it's not possible to meet them. I see this a lot. But then when you fail to meet them, really personalizing it as your own failure and not a sort of function of the difficult scenario that you're in or the difficult work where there is failure is to be expected.
No one wants to manage databases if they can avoid it. That's why MongoDB made MongoDB Atlas, a global cloud database service that runs on AWS, GCP, and Azure. You can deploy a fully managed MongoDB database in minutes with just a few clicks or a few API calls. MongoDB Atlas automates deployment, automates updates, handles scaling, and more so that you can focus on your application instead of taking care of your database. You can get started free at mongodb.com/atlas. Now, if you're already managing a MongoDB deployment, Atlas has a live migration service, so you can migrate it easily with minimal downtime and then get back to what matters. Stop managing your database Start using MongoDB Atlas. That idea that you just said about of personalizing it, of internalizing something, and then also, of course, having the community go around and make it about you as well can be really, really challenging because you're reflecting your feelings back on yourself into this feedback loop of how you suck. And then you look around and we have these titles, right? Like if Beyonce had the title senior software engineer, I would probably feel pretty lousy about my title because I'm not Beyonce, which gets to that point that you made before about the 10x engineer. That's every time you see the unicorn of the 10x engineer, which may or may not exist, all of that is just a system, a failure system that's been set up by ourselves and by our industry that does nothing but make one feel bad about themselves.
Right, right. And the concern that I have is we're working in this industry that has these challenges, but we're not talking about them. So everyone's sort of suffering in silence. Everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people are feeling like imposters, are feeling like the failure of their project or their company or of their team is their fault. And no one's talking about it to realize that other people are feeling the same way and to realize that it really is a pervasive scenario across so many professionals in this industry. And I think that if people realized that it wouldn't be as internalized quite as much, and people would be talking a little bit more about it to, get support from each other and just have that more open discussion.
So, when someone identifies that they might have a problem, they might feel a certain kind of way, but they may not necessarily have fantastic health insurance or a community or what's the word, a safety net. Where are places that they can go and find resources to explore and get support?
The Open Sourcing Mental Illness website is a great place to go for sort of a wealth of different supports. There are 3 handbooks. One is specifically for employees who are struggling with mental health problems while being a professional in the workplace. I will say that a lot of it is very legal. So if you can ignore that and jump right to sort of the supports, the different hotlines, the different resources, there are a lot. Because the discussion around mental health is growing so much attention in society in general. There are also great resources online. If this is more of a mild anxiety, temporarily feeling depressed, there are great resources. My recommendation as a professional is that we stop isolating ourselves even further by trying to solve the problem by ourselves on our computer, but that we actually reach out and start talking to people. There's a lot of research around how talking is a cathartic process. The field of therapy, psychotherapy in general, is largely based on this. It does have an impact on the brain that doesn't make the depression or anxiety go away, but it moves the neural activity a little bit in the brain that allows it to be have less of a sting, so it can be a little bit easier to move forward and problem solve and come up with solutions and make the effort that you need to improve things, just following a conversation, telling someone how you feel.
It feels like speaking about these things is really step one. Like the sense of isolation will only make it worse. Are you a fan of one-on-one therapy, or do you feel that like even user groups and personal self, getting together with friends and talking about these things in a circle, it can be therapeutic?
I think, yes, I think it's all therapeutic. It obviously depends a lot on what your needs are and how intense the challenges are you're dealing with, which determines, what level of support you might need. But I don't necessarily feel like you have to talk to someone one-on-one. I think there's a huge value in group discussions and bringing even more people into that discussion and how you're feeling and expressing that to other people. So if a group setting is not terrifying terrifying in itself, which it is for a lot of people,
Hmm.
that's a great, that's a great place to get some of that catharsis. If that is very intimidating for you, you can talk to someone one-on-one. If you don't want that person to be a partner, family member, a friend, there are plenty of professionals out there, therapists, coaches, that can provide sort of that safe space to talk through what's going on as well. So there really are a lot of options, and you can start wherever you want. Like maybe you start in a group setting and that doesn't work for you, then you can, tap another friend and try to talk to them one-on-one. If that doesn't work for you, you can maybe reach out to a coach or a therapist. It's kind of an experiment. There's no one right answer to this.
Hmm.
So it's part of it is trying different things. And like I said earlier, if you can't get yourself to try different things, that's a big indicator that you might need more support than what you're reaching out for.
That is a really good point. Any action at all that is positive forward motion, whether it be calling a friend or just reaching out and letting yourself, be heard, is better than doing nothing and curling up in a ball. But if you can only curl up in a ball, that's when you really need to take action.
Exactly. I would say, if you have trouble getting out of bed, if you are having trouble being effective at work or maintaining your relationships, and can't experiment with some different things to see if you can get out of that rut, that it would be beneficial to reach out to a professional and just get some insight for how to approach those challenges.
Now, you recently spoke at KubeCon and Cloud Native Con in North America here in 2019, and you pointed out in your talk that the number of people that are working in the tech community that have these challenges with mental illness, is quite disproportionate to the prevalence of the general population. And you specifically point out that people working in the tech community are particularly at risk for burnout. Is burnout a mental illness?
It's not. So, just to be clear, mental illness. This is a big misunderstanding. Mental illness is not actually a term or something that's researched or something that's diagnosed. It is a metaphor that our society uses to describe a diagnosable mental health disorder, which is what I mentioned earlier, where you meet certain symptom criteria, and then it also has a negative impact on your life. And you have to be, those symptoms have to be a couple standard deviations away from the mean, which is where most people fall, most people's behaviors fall. So burnout, and the reason it comes up in my talks when discussing mental health, is because burnout looks a lot like a mental health challenge. So if you look at what's going on in the brain, some of the neurotransmitters that are overactive tend to be the same, which is why when someone is burned out, they tend to demonstrate symptoms of depression and anxiety and just emotional dysregulation and sleep problems, just these things that tend to be categorized as under the the mental health disorders or mental illness. So it can look very, very similar, which is why, and it all falls under the scope of mental health. So that's why it comes up a lot in conversations that I have with people around mental health and technology.
So I understand that certainly the word normal is very relative, and it can sometimes be a word that may not necessarily be appropriate or feel appropriate. But, the scientific version of normal is kind of within a standard deviation or so of the mean, I suppose.
Yep.
But if is it normal to burn out, or is that just part of the ebb and flow of working in tech?
I think it is very normalized in tech, almost to a default, that we're not paying attention to the impact that it's having on our ability to function and be successful at work, just by the nature of the industry and what we chatted about earlier, the innovation, the forward movement, the new technology, the high expectations, the fast pace, the long hours, the challenges of startups, and just it all leads to really exhausting our abilities as professionals. And because we kind of ignore the indicators leading up to burnout, because that's what we do in tech, is we just keep going and going and going, it's not surprising to me that so many people are burned out, especially this time of year. I would say most people I'm working with right now are, in that range of burnout for sure. And the concerning piece of this, I think, is, aside from it doesn't feel great and you feel depressed and anxious or whatever burnout looks like for you, aside from that, burnout has a huge impact on your ability to work and be effective and concentrate and be productive. So it's almost to our detriment to ignore burnout or to put in place a culture and practice that actually encourage it, because it's, damaging the work overall and the productivity and ultimately the success of the work and the company that we're working with, if we're working with a company.
In your talks, while there's certainly no silver bullet or a single thing that one can do, a repetitive theme that I've heard you say is sleep, unplug, and talk. Why are those the three kind of like pillars of one getting started to think about their own mental health?
I like these three areas. I like encouraging people around these three areas because it has an impact wherever you fall on the mental health spectrum. So if you have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder, these three things can help. If you are temporarily experiencing milder symptoms of mental health issues, it can help. If you're experiencing burnout, it can help. The truth is that these three areas have an impact on the brain in a way that will help reduce some of these very common symptoms that we categorize. It doesn't matter how we characterized it as a disorder, an illness, burnout, quote unquote normal functioning for tech, however you want to describe it. It's going to have it should have a positive impact. We know just from the research around it. Sleep is hugely important. It's hugely important for someone with a diagnosed mental health condition, hugely important for someone experiencing burnout, hugely important for the person who's feeling depressed or anxious and they don't know if it's a result of burnout or if it's a mental health disorder. That's a great place to start, is make sure you're getting enough sleep, because sleep deprivation mimics a mental health condition, a mental health disorder or illness, as people say. So I have a lot of people ask me, how do I know if I have a mental illness or or I'm burned out, and I always say, check on your sleep first. Make sure that your brain is getting the rest that it needs, so you can rule that out. So that's where sleep comes from. The unplugging, again, same thing. It can sort of help differentiate between burnout or a true mental health condition or just more mild symptoms that need sort of a break from the intensity of the work that we're doing. And then the talking, we already kind of touched on the cathartic process of talking to other people and talking about how we feel.
Fantastic. Well, folks can check out all these different resources and videos and research that we talked about at osmihelp.org. And you can connect with Jennifer at the Growth Coaching Institute at growthcoachinginstitute.org, where they do executive coaching and all the kinds of things that a professional needs, whether it be one-to-one coaching or organizational coaching, and to set up an organization for success around mental health. Thank you so much for chatting with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Scott, and thanks for your attention to this area. It really is something that needs more promotion and attention, because it impacts so many people in this industry. So many people can identify with some of these challenges, and so it needs to be a more regular conversation. I appreciate the attention.
I appreciate you and your work. And this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.